Welcome. We're glad to have you this morning at Commerce Lexington Spotlight Breakfast Series. It's presented by Fifth Third Bank. Thank you, Fifth Third, for being our ongoing longtime sponsor. We offer these events to inform, educate, and shed light on topics and key issues and opportunities here in the Bluegrass region. We're excited to have with us today author and former Dollar General President Cal Turner Jr. with us, and we want to thank Bill Goodman with the Kentucky Humanities and the Kentucky Book Festival for bringing him here to Lexington. A few months ago, Bill came to us and said, I got a great idea. Linda Bobrowski and staff are all over it, and this is one of our best events I've had, just because I always go by the quality of the speaker. When I came in this morning extra early, Cal was already here, and he was interacting left and right with folks, and I learned so much history about the effect of you, your family, and Dollar General on Lexington and some of our key leaders. So that was a fascinating time, but I appreciate you coming in to do that. And again, Bill, always appreciate you. I would like to thank Fifth Third Bank for being our presenting sponsor series, and for being our presenting sponsor of this series. And I'd like to have Mark Boyson come up and say a few words. Mark, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bob. So today's spotlight is an interesting coincidence for me. At Fifth Third Bank, we go through ongoing training on analyzing companies' business models, their strategies, relative performance, and this helps us understand how companies are achieving their results. So the coincidence that I mentioned is that two companies, among many, but two companies that we compared in our training were Tiffany's and Dollar General. Both are retailers with store locations selling to consumers. But there are obvious differences in what is being sold, to who it's being sold, and for how much. So without getting into the weeds of our analysis, here are some high-level results of two very different business models in the same industry. So Tiffany's was founded in 1837. 102 years later, Dollar General is founded in 1939. At that time, it was initially called J.L. Turner and Sons, Cal's grandfather. With a 102-year head start, Tiffany's revenue last year was $4 billion. Dollar General, $23 billion. Tiffany's capitalization, which is the total value of the company to the shareholders, is $13 billion. In business for less than half the time, Dollar General's value, $29 billion. That's $13 billion for Tiffany's versus $29 billion for Dollar General. Now, I'll save you all the analysis, but kind of the bottom line on the good results is that, versus Tiffany's, is that Dollar General turned their inventory a lot faster. If you can imagine at Tiffany's, you walk in, all this expensive jewelry just sitting around forever in a big expensive store. Dollar General, it comes in, it goes out, and they made a lot more money. So Cal, congratulations to you, your father, your grandfather, for such a good performance. As a career banker, I've always been interested in how companies come into being and what was the spark or the idea that created it. I very much look forward to your comments today concerning your family and your company. Bob?
Excellent, Mark. Thank you. And again, thank you, Fifth Third, for being our longtime presenting sponsor. We do also have a special guest here that I would like to acknowledge. We have the Lindsey Wilson College president and his wife. We have Bill Lucky and Elise. Bill, Elise, thank you for being with us. And we also have a very special presentation that the mayor of Lexington is going to present Mayor Jim Gray.
Well, Mark, I appreciate that story. We all appreciate stories like that. I'm going to take a point of personal privilege a bit and tell a quick story before you all have your main attraction, and that's Cal Turner Jr. I'm going to put you all in the Wayback Machine real quickly, and to lands far away and to a time long ago, 1981 for me, and Scottsville, Kentucky, and Glasgow, Kentucky. Our family business grew up in Glasgow, Bill Goodman's hometown as well. And we were still in Glasgow in 1981. And there was this project that emerged for us, a construction company, down in Scottsville. It was a 100,000 square foot distribution center for a company named Dollar General. Well, fortunately, my mother and father had known Cal's mother and father. And I called him up and I said, Mr. Turner, we'd sure like to bid on your project. Well, we started negotiating with him. This was literally Christmas time in 1981. I'll never forget it. And we finally came to a negotiation, and I was negotiating with Cal himself, the president, the CEO of the company, on what amounted to at the time a very big project for us, $1 million project and 100,000 square feet. It wouldn't seem like that much today, Cal, but you negotiated with me. And as a friend of his, John Holland, who's the chairman of the Fruit of the Loom and Union Underwear, said to me, now that Cal Turner Jr. is a tough negotiator, Jim. He will break a penny into quarters. And I learned he was accurate on that. Well, we negotiated it. We got the final agreement literally on Christmas Eve. And I had a meeting with him where we shook hands. And that day and time, you didn't have to have a contract. You have a good shaking of hands. And he said, when I left on Christmas Eve, he said, now, Jim, Dollar General has been struggling a little bit. They had bought a company called Eagle, right? Eagles or Eagle? Eagle in Florida. So the stock wasn't doing real well. Probably on a share-adjusted basis today, it'd be worth about 10 cents. And he said to me, Jim, if I were you, I'd buy every single share of stock in Dollar General I could. And I said, well, Cal, I'm going to go home and I'm going to tell my brothers and my mother that that's exactly what we'll do. And I went home and I told my brother Howard, I said, Howard, Cal said we should buy every bit of Dollar General stock we can. And he said, well, that'd be great if we had 2 nickels to rub together to buy it, but we don't. What he didn't know was that our company was flat on its back at the time we negotiated that contract. If I'd have told Cal, he'd have never given us the job. But we were insolvent. It was because of that project and maybe 1 or 2 others that a company called Gray Construction actually survived. And we went on to do, I don't know how many of your distribution centers over time, but we were lucky. And in that course of time, we learned so much from Cal Jr. and from Dollar General, just like the stories that I've heard from a lot of you all here today, and Bob was just referencing. And you're going to hear a whole lot more about this. Well, now let me do what mayors do. I am pulling out, with 53 days left to go in a term, I'm giving away as many keys to the city and proclamations as I can. So I've got a proclamation. And it reads, Cal Turner Jr. Day. I, Jim Gray, as mayor of Lexington, in recognition of his leadership in business, in education, in philanthropy, in family and spiritual values, and in recognition of his irrepressible good humor and optimism, do hereby declare November 16, 2018 as Cal Turner Jr. Day in Lexington. There we go. There you go, bud. And I'm going to double down. I said, I've never done this before. What we have is not just a little token key to the city, Cal, but it is a really, really, really significant key to the city. It takes a big key to open the door to the city of Lexington. And I want to present this to you as well. Thank you so much for joining us and for being here for the Kentucky Book Fair for Bill Goodman and his great operation. Thank you. Let me put that in that big archives.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you all so much.
I tell my colleagues all the time, I love Lexington. Great, that's a great presentation and to a great individual. Okay, I would like to invite Carla Blanton to join Cal Turner Jr. on the stage. Moderating today's discussion is Carla Blanton, owner of Carla Blanton Consulting and past chair of Commerce Lexington Inc. Carla holds a distinction when I was out a good part of last year of wearing many hats, so she didn't read the fine print on that little agreement we had when she became chair, but she turned out to be one of the best leaders our organization has ever had, and we appreciate her greatly. Cal Turner Jr. graduated from Vanderbilt University in 1962. I won't tell you how old I was. I was young. And served more than 3 years as an officer in the United States Navy. In December of 1965, he began his career at Dollar General, the company founded by his father and grandfather in 1939. He became president in 1977 and chairman in 1988. When he retired in 2003, Dollar General had grown into a New York Stock Exchange retailer with more than 6,000 stores in 27 states and annual sales in excess of $6 billion. Cal will be discussing his book entitled My Father's Business, The Small Town Values That Built Dollar General into a billion-dollar company. We'll take questions at the end of the program today, so be thinking about what you would like to ask Mr. Turner, and I'm going to throw in one other thing. If you have not had the chance yet to purchase his book, just the little bits I've read, the little cover part, it's pretty fascinating. So I hope you will do so, and it's right here as you leave today. And he might just sign a copy if you ask. I'm going to turn the program over to Carla. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Mr. Turner, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
It's a joy to be here,
I
Carla.
have read your entire book, and you'll see from the little Post-it notes, there were several things that stood out to me that I want to talk to you about today. It strikes me that your story is just, and your family story is quintessentially American and uniquely Kentucky. As the mayor pointed out, some of the things I love about Kentucky, my adopted state, can really be summed up by the story that you told, Mayor, and I think it was just a great representation of both of your companies and the importance that they play in Kentucky. For those of the folks in the audience who haven't read your book yet and are somewhat familiar with Dollar General and somewhat familiar with your story, I was hoping you'd spend just a few minutes talking about your grandfather, who the book jacket described as a dirt farmer turned Depression-era entrepreneur, and then a little bit about your father and you taking over the company, just to kind of set the stage a little bit for just the amazing story that Dollar General is.
Thank you, Carla. What a joy it is to me to be here. Thank you for your reception. I don't consider this to be my book nor my story. It's ours. It's about small town USA and the values there. It's about family. It's about God. It's about community. It's about what can happen when people come together to help each other. And it did, Carla, all start with Luther Turner, my grandfather, Papa, who at the age of 11 had to take over the heavily mortgaged family farm. He had 3 younger siblings, and his father was killed in a Saturday afternoon accident, a wrestling match. And Luther, with his 3rd grade education, was in charge. Luther Turner had one thing going for him. No, he had more than one thing. He had hard work, and he had the belief that since he only had a 3rd grade education, everybody that he met was smarter than he was, and that he should learn something from everybody he met. And retailing became nirvana for the Turners because it was so much easier than farming. And his only son, my father, Cal, my dad was the surviving baby of 3, and he was therefore the only son, and he became integral to the business. It was a family business from the time my father's education exceeded 3rd grade. My father never met a stranger. He seemed to be an only child wanting to adopt more brothers and sisters into a family. And Papa and my father became role models for me about hard work, listening to others, and learning from other people. And this book is about how all of that evolved and my lifelong study of what God-centered leadership really means here and now. And Carla, I wrote it hoping that it could help any reader to make application to his or her life that more effective leadership can be in place. Today, we need the kind of leadership that comes from the small town values of that company. And by the way, I have to say to our dear banker friend that it really is easier to make money when you sell toilet paper instead of diamonds.
Great. In the book, the company obviously goes through various phases, various leadership styles. You talk about the difference between an entrepreneur and what you describe as a seasoned leader who runs a large-scale organization. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between an entrepreneur and that seasoned leader?
Well, interesting to me is that I learned how to discern that difference from my mother. I believe that there's something in the female DNA that educates about how to make a connection with other people, how to read people, how to connect with them. Now, the entrepreneur, I found, and I share that in the book, my father was the quintessential entrepreneur, but he could explain nothing to his son. I went into the business to learn from him, and he couldn't explain anything to me. It was just in his gut. So I had to pull from my dad lessons, and I had to observe him. Now, my mother had her job at home helping the entrepreneur, Cal Turner, be more of a leader and a person to connect with people. She'd go visit stores with him, and after one store visit, she said, "Cal, I'm not going in the next store with you unless you behave better." "What do you mean, Laura?" I said, "Cal, that store manager where we just left is right now in the stockroom crying. What? He said, I was just talking to her about how to sell sweatshirts and how to display underwear so the customer can find his size, you know, Fruit of the Loom underwear sort of thing. And she said, the way you came across is very different from what you think. Now, leadership is about how you connect with other people. Leadership is about whether you project to the other person, I value you. I love you. I really want to know what you think. Have you observed how people, well, today people will say, how are you? And they'll go right on. Well, I once got a compliment. The compliment I cherish perhaps the most of any I've received came from a 13-year-old employee who told others that when about 12 years ago when he had started with Dollar General, he was unloading a trailer on the loading dock, and I came for a visit, and I came up into the trailer, and I asked him, how are you? But he said, but he listened to my answer. So that's why I'm with this company, because when I'm asked how I am, the person really wants to hear the answer. So a leader is someone who can listen, I think, in love to the other person without working so hard on what am I going to say next that I don't have time to listen to what he or she is saying right now. But I always laughed about the difference. I would say, well, boss spelled backwards is double S-O-B. And we don't even aspire to have a boss in this company.
One of the things you write in here is the philosophy of learning by doing. And that really struck a chord with me because I was fortunate enough to have an education and very early in my career to have bosses who had that philosophy, and I think I benefited from that greatly. What is the importance of that, and why is that something that you stress?
Well, when good leadership is in place, the learning and the doing are commingled because you have bonded with others and you are learning from the doing. You're learning from mistakes. You're willing to help each other admit mistakes. And the whole organization grows from the doing learning that is the agenda of leadership. And I was sharing with you earlier, Carla, that when I told my dad that we were going to start strategic planning, he had only one thing to say. Okay, whatever it is, if you think it's the thing to do, go ahead. However, son, I don't want you to have planners. I want you to have plan doers. And that distinction probably makes the difference between organizations whose planning is effective and those whose planning is an exercise of non-effect. It is the culture of an organization. It is the communication. It is the cooperation of an organization that makes perhaps not so good strategic planning effective. But brilliant strategic planning without that kind of culture in an organization Doesn't work very well, in my opinion.
So how do you keep it from being a plan that sits on the shelf? How do you make sure that it's front and center every day in everything you do?
Well, I do think the person at the top sets the pace. Everybody pays, in an organization, everybody pays attention to what the boss pays attention to. What does the boss pay attention to? Is the boss a leader or a mere manager? A manager is all about results. A manager is more about short-term success. A leader is about development and long-term success. And so it's important for the person, the most influential person, who's usually the person at the top, to set the right pace. I struggled with that, Carla. And I decided I should take my mother's advice and realize that it was my job to be the best salesman in Dollar General, and I had to sell the job of CEO to the whole company. And I started by saying, well, we all know how I got my job. I'm the boss's son. And I admit to you that I'm over my head. I've tried all of the jobs you do in this company. Most all of them I've done poorly, but I've observed you do them well. And I respect you and the work you do. I respect your understanding of how to solve problems, because you do it all the time, every day, and I'm here to tell you I need your help, and you have my commitment that if you'll help us to figure this company out and its best opportunity that we can all go for together, the success will be shared with you. That's my commitment to you, that we'll all participate in the success. And please give us your truth. Organizations are full of people who try to tell the boss what the persons think the boss wants to hear. The boss asks a question. Ooh, I wonder what the right answer is. Well, what if the boss really wants your truth? Then, by the way, you're going to work harder to think about your truth and present it to the boss in a way that can help the whole company. There's nothing complicated about leadership, Carla. It's pretty simple, but it's something you have to work at all the time.
And sometimes the simplest things are the hardest things to do, right?
Oh, boy. Yes, indeed. Keeping it simple is a real challenge. And I think the challenge is as great today as it ever has been in this day and time where everything is instantaneous. And I do worry about society today, Carla, and whether we can do enough coming together to move forward as a society.
What role do you think corporations have in helping that happen, if any?
Well, I think every corporation should first take care of its own assets and opportunities and agenda. And every organization needs to have the values that my mentor and Bill Lucky's mentor, Larry Apley, had. There's one test of whether anything on earth is worthwhile. What is the effect on human development? The most important asset on earth is human potential. And any organization needs to look at its opportunity to help human development. That's the challenge. And Carla, my mother helped me to understand how to go about that, because when I was a teenager and getting into trouble, she'd say, "Son, for a good boy, you get into a lot of trouble." Look at what I learned from women right there. Separate the person from the problem. Get beyond guilt or blame into real problem solving that can unite people. And so, Carl, I threw my mother's principles at my father when the old-time retail operator that he was, and something would go wrong in the company, would say, "Who did that?" And I'd say, "I'm not going to tell you, Daddy." "Do you know who did it?" "Yes, sir." "Who did it?" "I'm not going to tell you, and we're not going to ask that question anymore, Daddy." Instead of saying, "Who did it?" we're going to say, "What happened, and who needs my help to fix it?" We have to come together and learn, because there's never any one person who created a problem at Dollar General. We're too big now. There are always multiple persons, and we need multiple persons to fix whatever problems we have. And that can't happen until we get over blaming somebody and looking first to see who is to blame. Today, that's what's going on in society. There's finger pointing. The agenda of leadership may be to break a bunch of fingers. I don't think I ever put it that way before.
One of the things I really found refreshing about this book is you didn't shy away from the problems the company had, the problems that you may have had with your family. Yeah. And we're not a culture that really likes to talk about that kind of thing. Why did you think it was important to really share all of that with readers?
Well, my hope is that there is a lot for the reader to learn from all that I experienced. And my honest sharing of failure, of loss, of breakup of our family and the company, that was the platform for real growth. But I want to share the sausage making of leadership with the reader. There's a chapter in the book titled Life's Toughest Decision. We had a family business. We had been public a long time, but we were about to go down the tubes as a company. And I had to make the decision of whether to fire my brother. And it was life's toughest decision. And I've proclaimed myself to be a backsliding Methodist, and my prayers were really the prayers of a backslider, because I was ticked off at God that I was in the position of having to make the decision of whether to fire my brother. I share how I processed that. And I share how the answer to me came from the 15th chapter of John. By the way, I consider the good book to be the leadership manual, and I recommend it to you.
In talking about failures and talking about learning by doing, and everybody makes mistakes, and we all learn probably more from our mistakes than sometimes we do from our successes, but there's still such a worry. You talked about your father and the finger pointing. How do you set up that culture where people are allowed to make mistakes, but you've got some guardrails so that the mistakes hopefully aren't too monumental? Is there a way to do that?
Well, perhaps leadership is parenting on steroids. How do you raise your kids? How do you influence your kids? They're not influenced so much by what you tell them. They're influenced by who you are, how you live your life. And I think that's the way it is in a company too. I started by acknowledging the truth about myself, that I was the boss's son and I was over my head. That, I thought, helped people to be more willing to deal with their mistakes or their problems, knowing that this wasn't a company that was going to cloud up and rain all over them for a mistake. In fact, this is a company that's growing so fast, and we all need to learn together. We better analyze our mistakes together and solve our problems together. And I found that the guardrails are better defined by the persons who have to stay within them. Anytime there was a tough job, if I could get the person who had to do that job to set the standards for the job, the standards would be higher than I would have set in the first place. And then, if the person would need the help of others to have that kind of success, and the person would need a culture of being open with other people, sharing your failures or your successes and your hopes and your dreams, people can help you out so well. Now, please understand something. This company isn't something that I did. Strategic planning isn't something that I did. I once read that if Thomas Edison had been a strategic planner, instead of a light bulb, we'd have a larger candle today. Because strategic planning has a way of analyzing the past and perpetuating it. But if there is a fascination with change that works here, then you have a real dynamic leadership culture in whatever the organization, whether it's Dollar General or Tiffany or Lindsey Wilson, the University of Kentucky, or whatever it is. It's the fundamentals of leadership can make a difference, and we need leaders today. And by the way, that's why I'm honored to be here to share with all of you, because you're the ones who are going to make the difference. It is you that matter now. And I hope you understand that I feel real love for you and the concern for your accomplishment in the future. And I hope you realize how much you need others for success that's even bigger than you might expect. I never thought, today Dollar General operates over 15,000 stores, and I believe its sales are more than 25 billion. Now, the company has done so much better since Turner's ran it. What do you think about that? Doing so much better without me. And I might have read my own press clippings and thought that I was doing things while I was there. I wasn't. But the way the company was established, the hard work of Luther Turner, the values, learning from other people, partnering with other people, adopting others into your family the way the only child, the real Cal Turner, my dad, did. Those are the things, I think, that contribute to the 25 billion in sales today. And I'm so honored that I was a part of the history. And you, I hope, when you achieve the ripe old age of 78, will have the joy of looking back on that and saying, wow, God was really working through all of that. Wasn't he or she? Is God male or female?
That's a topic for another day.
Okay.
You wrote in the book, and you touched on a little bit here, the importance of human development. And we were talking a little bit before the program began about succession planning. And most large corporations probably have a great structure in place for how to do that. Smaller businesses, even the community, as we look around and talk about who is that next generation of leaders and how do we groom them and prepare them to take the reins so that when we have a problem in Frankfurt or City Hall, we never have a problem in City Hall, but if we were, who are those folks, or just a problem in the community, how do we groom people and get them ready to take that mantle of leadership?
Well, don't take yourself too seriously to focus on the way the question was worded, which is the way any of us would word the question. How do we groom them? We don't. We try to set the climate for them to aspire to be so much more than they might think possible. I haven't been a part of anybody else's development other than to encourage them to ask a better question, them to go for a deeper truth. It's what others have within themselves. It's the God-given creativity of human potential that a leader helps to draw out. Now, succession planning we worked on in our company. We had some pretty sophisticated programs, but our program was based on taking an inventory of the human talent in the company and asking each significant management person in the company to take his or her own inventory and to be honest about strengths and weaknesses. We all have them. And if we understand our own strengths and weaknesses, then we can better assess our opportunity to move out from here and to serve others. When we adopted that mission statement, Carla, serving others. Life isn't about me. It's not about us. It's not about our success. It's about the significant others in our life. For us, it was about customers, employees, and shareholders. If it's a community you're concerned about, it is the human potential in that community. It is to deal honestly with the problems in the community that are the greatest impediment to human development. What are they? And what are the ones we can come together now to do something about? Succession planning. It's a label for a lot of complicated stuff to try to figure out. And I discovered that even succession planning can come better when you let others do their own figuring out. You don't try to figure it out for them.
You mentioned your corporate mission statement. Would you share with the audience your personal mission statement, and then just how you tried to use that in your daily life, in your decision-making process?
Well, I got my personal mission statement when I was teaching leadership development in our company, and I was teaching about mission. And I held up the standard for a mission. I said, now, a mission needs to be inspiring, impossible, and brief. It needs to be brief so you can remember it. If your mission statement is a paragraph, chances are it hadn't passed an important test. It's not brief enough. Impossible. Now, inspiring, you understand. Impossible means that it's not just an objective. A manager can have an objective to become this in sales and earnings, to achieve this milestone. Once you achieve it, you've done it. A mission should inspire you every day of your life. As a backsliding Methodist, I say that you need something that helps you screw your head back on right every day. Then, so I went through all this stuff. I was teaching it to the Dollar General leaders in the meeting, and then I gave them my mission statement. It was a paragraph. I'm not going to repeat it to you, but I gave them my mission statement. After the meeting, after the 3.5 day of work of the meeting, a short, bespectacled, unimpressive physical specimen of a man came up to me, and he said, "Mr. Turner, I'd like to tell you my mission statement." He said, "It's short and inspiring, and I'll never really get it done." My mission statement is 3 words: God honoring change. Every day of my life, Mr. Turner, when I get up, I can remind myself that this whole day, with whomever, in whatever circumstances, my mission is to be part of the change that honors God. And I thought, wow. I don't have a paragraph anymore for a mission statement. I have 3 words: God honoring change. Change that honors God is an ongoing prescription that inspires me to try to follow. God honoring change.
Is it still your mission statement today?
It still is my mission statement, and it still winds me up and gets me going.
I'm going to ask one more question and then not be selfish. I think Angela's going to come around with the mic if you all have some questions that you would like to ask. But you had the difficult task not only of following the founder of your company, but that it was really incumbent upon you to start to initiate change. And even when things were going well, you initiated change. And in the book, you talk about taking on the sacred cows. And I think those were the mantras that your father established that guided the business. And you did that by trying to make change attractive. What's your advice on how we can do that in our own organizations? Because that's a pretty tough task to take on the sacred cows and to make change attractive.
Well, I had to convince everybody that I was willing to consider any change that they thought we should do. It is they who have to implement the change, after all. So I really need to convince them that I'm willing to hear anything. And at that time, the two leaders of the company were my dad and I. And there were certain principles. So I decided just to call them sacred cows and say, you have my commitment that we'll slaughter any sacred cow of this company. I thought that would get their attention. Now, here's how we're going to go about slaughtering it. First of all, we're going to talk about how and why it became sacred in the first place. And then secondly, we're going to talk about whether it is still relevant now and into the future. And if it isn't, we'll slaughter it. And then one of them said to me, all right, Cal Jr., I'll tell you what's wrong with the company. It's that you and your father always quote Luther Turner, who said, if it's bought right, it's half sold. Well, yes, Ron, what's wrong with that? He said, so look at all this half-sold inventory we're stuck with now. So we have to start working on the other half. I said, what do you mean? He said, your dad's the great buyer. He is a great buyer. And we just shove everything your dad has bought out to the stores. We have buyer push in this company now. We need to work on customer pull. What does the customer need from us? And with that statement, Carla, we began a strategic turn of 180 degrees from the business model of my father. And that's when the company really started going. And it started with my kind of making fun of the leader, Cal, sacred cow. If I had a lot of papers piled on my desk in the office, I'd call it my cow pile. You know, just anything to kind of make fun of myself so that they knew I didn't take myself too seriously. I learned that from my mother. A leader doesn't take himself or herself too seriously.
Okay, I lied. I want to ask one more question just because I want to get it in. I can't find it in here. I was looking for it. But when you said customer pull, that was something that really struck a nerve with me. And the other thing that really struck a nerve was you talked about we're so focused on what our competitors are doing rather than, I can't find it in here, but than what our customers want. And we need to refocus ourselves. Can you talk a little bit about what you meant by that and how you go about making sure, I mean, you've always got to keep your eye on the competition, but that your main focus is the customer that you're serving.
Oh, yes. Well, I observe that retailers seem to get into trouble by copying each other. They ought to pay more attention to the customer. And So I kept trying to figure out what that meant for us. What is our greatest opportunity to serve the customer? And I once read a definition by, I think it was Boston Consulting Group, of strategy. Strategy is defining the customer pull on your uniqueness. Now but you have to think about that. What does the customer need that you uniquely are in a position to provide? That is what every organization should think about. First of all, who is the customer? Now, we didn't try to serve the Tiffany customer. Our customers are the struggling people in small town America who are having a hard time getting by, and the struggle of life makes them very smart about value and price, and we ought to be in stock for them when they run out of toilet paper. That gets it down to very simple terms that everybody can understand. What is the customer? Who is our customer? What does the customer need? And what can we do for the customer? Well, we're close to the customer. Dollar General is closer in physical proximity to its customer, I think, than almost any retailer out there. And at the end of last year, 75% of the population of the continental United States lived within 5 miles of a Dollar General store. The company redefined itself. We're not a retailer. We want to be a customer-driven distributor of consumable basics. And I've always thought that Dollar General should not have any trouble counteracting Amazon. And my simple statement is, I don't think anybody wants to buy toilet paper through the mail. Our customer needs toilet paper when she runs out. And we're close to her in stock on toilet paper if we're doing our job right.
Great. Questions? Robert?
Mr. Turner, it's been very enjoyable. 35 years ago, you couldn't hardly find Scottsville with a search warrant, much less drive there on purpose due to the crazy roads we have in rural Kentucky. And I often marveled when I called on your store down there at your headquarters, how in the world you could get truck drivers to bring products to your warehouse and then put them on your trucks and take them to the store.
How could we get truck drivers? Let me understand the question.
Trucking companies to deliver products from the factories to your warehouse in Scottsville, and then you transfer it to your trucks and haul it to your stores all over Kentucky, much less the rest of the country, from that rural area and those narrow roads that were designed for wagons with produce on them.
Well, that was, I suppose it was a problem we always had. For example, the truck driver who was a thinking truck driver who stopped and called the dispatcher, and he said, "You have sent me to the wrong place. I have 35,000 fruit cakes to deliver in a town that doesn't have 3,500 people in the town. You have sent me to the wrong place." Scottsville is not, you don't just find yourself in Scottsville, Kentucky. But that was home. That's where we knew the customer. That's that's where there was a customer that we had heart for. And that's the best way to define a business with a purpose. Look at the opportunity that's close at hand. You might be more familiar with the problems and the opportunities where you are than to try to go out somewhere else and come up with something brilliant. My grandfather used to say a mule is smarter than a man, because once a mule learns its stall in the barn, it'll always return to that stall. But a man will think, if he put it in the masculine, because that's the way it was done back then. He said, once a man is good at something, he might get bored with that and think he needs to try to get into another stall and try something different that will tickle his fancy. Well, your opportunity to grow and develop and serve may be very close to where you are. And so if we had enough success, somehow those truckers found Scottsville.
Other questions?
Hi. So I'm with our public library system here, and for those of y'all who don't know, the Turners have done a tremendous amount, and Dollar General has done a tremendous amount for libraries and literacy over the course of your career in the last few decades. Can you talk a little bit about the role of philanthropy that philanthropy has had on both your career and your personal life?
Well, philanthropy means love of your fellow man. And philanthropy is the agenda of life that anyone who aspires to be a leader should pursue. What has God wound me up for? I like how Henry Nouwen, Catholic theologian now deceased, said that every person before birth is a twinkle in the eye of God, and at death returns to being a twinkle in the eye of God. And between birth and death, every person has only one thing to do. Say back to God, I love you too. How do you say that back to God? You say it by your love for your fellow man. Philanthropy is the manifestation, to me, of the heart of a leader who's committed to human development. How can I help others? The philanthropy that defines our family today is to anything that addresses the struggle of life that our customer has. Struggling people. What can we do to help that core customer of Dollar General to have a better life? We were inspired by Luther Turner. He only had a third grade education, as I said, and his life was consumed by his quest for survival of family and friends. If you have, and if I have, an agenda of philanthropy in life, we are most blessed. And we receive a lot more than we give.
My name is Rachel Elan, and I'm with Pro Coach of Kentucky. And my question for you is, what advice would you give to someone my age? I'm 23 years old, and I'm going into family business as well. And I would love to know advice that you would have for someone who has, I could say, pressure on trying to carry on a legacy or being successful at a young age.
Well, I don't consider myself, Rachel, to be very good at giving advice. I was once asked the question, what do you want your legacy to be, Mr. Turner? And I immediately said, I don't want one, I'm too selfish. What do you mean? Look, even if I created a legacy, it wouldn't last very long, and it would just be about me. I don't want that. I want to be able to discern God's agenda and how I can get on board where God's on the move. What can I do here and now that has eternal significance? I don't want a legacy here on earth. I want what is the human need that God would have me to address? What's my greatest opportunity to meet that need? And I remind myself that there are only two rules that come from the good book. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Well, I'm a backsliding Methodist. I don't know how to do rule number one, so I get started on rule number two. If I start working on loving my neighbor, well, the people who are around me, some of them aren't too damn lovable. But they need what love can bring to their life, don't they? So my enemies become part of my agenda. And I have found that sometimes some of the lessons I really needed to learn were hurled at me by my vicious enemy who was trying to do me in. But if I really listened to what was being said to me and asked God to help me figure out why that was said to me, what part of it do I deserve? What part of it can I do something about? God, this SOB is really after me. Help me to learn from that. Well, you know, that's backsliding Methodist way of trying to do the sausage, make the sausage of life in a way that pleases the Creator. It's the most rewarding hard work I've ever attempted.
I'll just, as Bob comes back up to close the program, I want to remind you that Mr. Turner will be doing the book signing at the book fair tomorrow, which is at the Alltech Arena at the Horse Park from 9 to 11, but would encourage you to spend the day there. I've been talking to Bill about the great lineup that they have out there all day, so it's been a pleasure personally to be with you today.
Thank you. I've talked too much, more than I meant to, Carla.